what we're going to do next is we are going to bring our next panelist to learn how to not lose a customer in 10 days, which is a pretty interesting topic to discuss. Customer retention, user research, how do we keep them in-house? And for that, we have Marcus Müller here. Hey, Marcus.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And we're also going to be joined by Jared Schreiber. We're going to give him a second, and you're going to see his face on the screen. But with that being said, Akos, I'm turning it over to you again.
And the topic is how to not lose customers in 10 days, which is a reflection on that Matthew McConaughey movie back in the days when he wasn't an A-class actor in Inception and similar movies. But the point being that startups put a lot of effort on acquiring customers and optimizing channels for customer acquisition. But then you get them across the line, they create an account. How do you make sure that they don't churn very quickly? They see the value of your product and they become active customers for a long period of time. And this is like the topic that I'd like to discuss with the two of you. And I'd like to start with an article that I read from Atlassian. It was one of the product managers of Atlassian, and they said that it takes a new user about 30 minutes to decide if that particular Atlassian tool is suitable for them and to give like a yes or no. And I think Atlassian is in a privileged position. I wonder, what do you think? How much time does a user in your companies where you worked in the past? How much did they take to decide whether they take your product or they don't? And let's start with Jared.
Sure. Well, I've had an extreme across the B2B2C spectrum. On the B2B side, $1 million investments where a senior vice president is expecting their team members to use the software. The team members are going to invest in it hours trying to figure out if it'll work for them. And on the flip side, I've had mobile apps like Out of Milk, the world's most used shopping list app, or other apps where you probably have about 10 to 15 seconds to engage the consumer and help them understand the value proposition of the app, or you're going to lose them. So yes, I would say Atlassian is more in the extreme, but it really depends on the product category, the level of investment from the customer into the job to be done by your product.
Yeah, I can really feel you, Jared, because I've also experienced both extremes. In kick scooter sharing, for example, we have had users who are in front of a kick scooter, download the app, try to unlock the scooter broken, and you never see this customer again. It's like a couple of seconds. While N26, of course, if you convert a customer, they go through a quite long, even though considering traditional banks, an 8-minute sign-up process for a bank account is fast, but it's still a long 15 steps. You get the card, video verification, that stuff process. And then it's like customers receive the card. There's so many steps. They have to load their initial account, have to make the first purchase. So for N26, we realized okay, we need to get to customer to the first couple of payments, do first interactions. We've identified this as a critical point, because then they started using the product more and more and more. But just signing up, just getting the card, even activating the card, or doing one transaction. I don't remember how many it was, a handful of transactions where we've seen, okay, now users start to become active. So we don't talk about seconds here, but we still talk about minutes. And now I'm completely in the other extreme. We do B2B for medical device manufacturers, large corporates. We have a couple of weeks of negotiations, onboarding, very similar to what you said, very different level of engagement. I think it's very important that you understand in what business you are and tailor the experience to whatever is needed for the given industry. And I think that is the most important piece here.
Marcus, I think something that we share from our experience is there's usually a moment or an action that happens sometime after the initial download or registration, that if you can get a user to engage in that action, then the clock starts in terms of your ability to retain. And until you get somebody to do that, it's a total crapshoot whether or not that person's going to continue.
Totally agree. I think and this is what you should identify. What is this initial action for the user to realize, there's really value. Like kick scooter sharing, if someone never took a kick scooter, it's probably a first ride, completing the first ride. If you have taken a lot of rides, it's a bit of commodity. So it's more like, is the overall experience better with this service? Like scooter, does it feel the scooter good? Is that simple to unlock and so on? So it might take them a couple of rides even. And yeah.
I would argue in competitive situations like that, and this ties to some research I did in the consumer goods industry, it comes down to what happens on their very next occasion when they have an option to do it again or not. So for example, in a competitive situation where they're already familiar with this type of product or service and they're successful the first time, they're really baselining and comparing that to what they're familiar with as an alternative. And so you will only know if you've been successful if they're effectively choosing you again on the very next occasion when they have that need.
Yeah, fully agree.
So I'm really interested in how you, both of you and your respective companies, how you figured out that pivotal moment when a customer just, clicked and they said, okay, I can literally pinpoint it to this particular step that this customer likes my product and is going to continue using that.
I'll go ahead and start. I'll pick an example from an app my team created years ago called Receipt Hog. It convinced consumers to take pictures of their shopping receipts every time they went shopping, no matter where they shopped or what they bought. And they would get some kind of financial reward, and we would get the anonymous data for market research purposes. And what we were finding were huge retention differences depending on the user acquisition channel. If we'd done a pay-per-click type campaign in a mobile game, we'd get a lot of downloads, but we may not get registrations. If we'd done it via different means, like a Tapjoy, maybe we'd get the download and the registration, but we wouldn't get people taking pictures of the receipts. And so what we ended up doing is we ended up dividing users into different cohorts of how we had acquired them. And we figured out, where does their behavior normalize? From what point forward in using our service or our app does future behavior normalize, where it doesn't matter where they came from anymore? And that was the magic moment. And it turned out for us with Receipt Hog, the magic moment was not downloading the app. It was not registering for the app. It was not filling out a basic questionnaire. It was taking a picture of their first shopping receipt. And from that point forward, no matter how we had acquired that user, from word of mouth, from pay-per-click, or whatever, on a cohort basis, the behavior was the same, regardless of acquisition channel.
Yeah, I think that is the particular challenge for the early days. It takes time to figure out. It takes time you need a little bit of data, you need some experience. And like, for example, we are currently in an industry with very long sales cycles, a very long time to really get activation because we don't have a weekly use case. It's more of a monthly use case. So this is that, then you need to look for sometimes early indicators that can maybe point you to things to say, okay, if that happens, it's likely that something else is happening. So we're doing a smart job and mapping your drivers, so to say, in the business is helpful, and really understanding the business model and then study it. So in 26, we did a lot of cohort analysis throughout, like from many different points. But to be honest, in the first year, we were almost kind of like, it took us since at least 6 months after launch to have a decent data set. So we were able to do some proper cohort analysis, because in the beginning, like, everything went so fast, so we didn't have even the real data to do this analysis. So we were just more coming with qualitative interviews and trying to understand, okay, is that really the point? So your confidence grows as you gather more data, if you're gain experience in the field. And I think this is why being hypothesis driven and experiment driven, say, okay, that's my current assumption, but don't like challenge that assumption again and again and again till at some point it might be very clear for your business because you have a lot of proof points. Start with an early assumption and try to again to prove it. So
but you can tie that assumption to where do we think the customer is going to realize the value of our product, right? So in other words, it's not something that they do. It's a point at which they get some reward or value or use out of the product versus, you know, they're doing things that you need them to do in order to use your service versus they're getting some benefit or reward back out. Like that transition point, that inflection point in the journey seems to me one of your starting points to explore when you don't have the data yet, when you don't have the ongoing usage data. And then the second thing I would say is from a B2B analytics product that I worked on for a number of years, what we found was if a user ran a report to understand sales of a product through a retailer, for example, and then their next action was to go run the exact same report with either a different product or a different retailer, we had them. We had them. We basically, they're like, ooh, now I want to see it this way, or now I want to see it for that, or whatever. And if they were willing to wait a minute or two for it to run, and like it took us a while to realize that. It wasn't obvious to us immediately, but that's another example where there's this kind of repeated behavior, a tweak of the behavior, and that's kind of a way to know that, okay, you've got them hooked now.
I think I try to sum it up. It's like, it's not easy. It's not straightforward. It's not one answer. It's like you start with qualitative research, try to understand, study the thing, run experiments. At some point, cohort data will guide the way, but pay attention to this. I think that's the important thing. Like, pay attention to figure out what is this moment, and what is this tipping point, and optimize the experience to this point. And I fully agree what you said is like the sales channels, or the channels like be it sales or marketing. It's very important. And product and sales/marketing work together really well. I see this in so many companies where sales and marketing does something completely different than what product does. And if that's not aligned, this is like making it very hard for everyone. And unfortunately, it's rarely the case.
Sure. Actually, there's something you touched on that I think is really important here, which is as soon as you find what that kind of tipping point of value creation is, optimize everything up until that point so that it becomes as streamlined and easy and as fast as possible for the consumer to reach that point quickly. That kind of that tipping point of, okay, I've gotten value out of this. I can see the value in this app or this service or something like that.
So you optimize that time to value, and the way you know what is value is that you see repeat behavior or like a jump in. Okay.
Yeah. Or you see that all of a sudden the inbound cohort doesn't matter anymore if once they get to that point, that behavior from that point forward is the same, or regardless of acquisition channel, behavior after that point is the same. You know, those are some ways that you can have an indication.
Yeah, I want to add one last thing to this, because you said inbound cohort. We also focused a lot because we had the N26 such a complex sign-up process with so many steps that got diluted a lot by depending on where people were coming from which marketing channel. So we focused a lot on the organic channel because that was the most stable one. And we knew, okay, when we make an impact on that one, it's likely to make an impact on the overall channel, so to say. So that's why I like your inbound/organic field to say, okay, that's most likely the one you can focus on if you don't have advanced analytics and so on capabilities.
Cool. Guys, you already touched upon some, and you mentioned a few KPIs that relate to the like measuring and the data. And I just wanted to focus on that topic a little bit. And in your businesses, what kind of dashboards did you build? What kind of KPIs did you track to have an idea of where you have an activation problem and how and to see the impact or like come up with measures how to improve that?
Yeah, I can give you again two very different examples: N26 consumer business and like current setup. And I think what is similar with both is like in the early days, you look at leading indicators. This can be qualitative metrics such as a net promoter score or Alice score or something. But then, of course, there's more truth within real retention metrics and particularly churn metrics. But churn is always a lagging indicator. So it might take quite long to see whether users are churning or not. And that's why I think like N26, we started a lot looking at different levels of activity. We had a group of so-called financial active users. This was the lowest level of activity. You did an interaction within a given time frame. Then we had regular active user, and we had the salary accounts, so kind of power users, with different groups of intensity of usage. And we were trying to manage people upwards in that. So say, okay, you first get here and then go upwards and say, okay, what's the share of people in what kind of group? And then measure that on different retention cohorts. And then also measured not only like, and even the way we measured activity had multiple facets, like from how many actions did you do in the app, but also from a financial point of view, what's the transaction volume, for example, that you have? Is that going up or down? Not just the actions that you have. So it has a lot of different aspects, but when it comes down, it's really retention, different types of retention metrics, and then always a bit combined with the qualitative parts. And now we are in a B2B business, and we only got started. Like we have 20 clients that currently test our product. We've signed the first customers. And here we have very little retention metrics. So the first thing we did is an NPS survey, because it's a question that is easy to start with. Say, hey, after first onboarding, first usage, would you recommend this to someone? Alice score is, I think it's better. The question of like how likely, like if I would take away the product from you, how disappointed would you be? I think that's a better question, but I cannot ask as a user who used the product 1 or 2 times. I would rather wait a little bit to see somewhat of a usage and then say, okay, what if I take it away from you now? How disappointed are you? So that's our step 2. And then step 3 is retention. And step 4 is like in our business where you have a 1-year contract, is like looking at churn, like real churn, meaning contract cancellations. So yeah, I hope that gives a bit of a feeling. Happy to hear what you.
If I could just add, I think the benefits of Net Promoter Score is that you can do it almost immediately. So you can get really quick feedback, no matter how long the customer has been a customer or using it. And it's super benchmarkable from the standpoint of you can know exactly where you stand relative to other kinds of products and services in the general kind of industry and whether you're doing well or not. And then the third is more and more research is demonstrating that it ties really well to actual word of mouth. Like it's a multiplier. People who rate you 1 to 6 are gonna do very tiny amounts of word of mouth. People who rate you 7 to 8 are gonna do twice that amount. People who rate you 9 are gonna do twice that amount, and people who rate you 10 are gonna do twice what the 9s do in terms of word of mouth. And so, exponential value creation there, and it's a quick way to get a sense of how well are we delivering, significant, meaningful, differentiated value to the clients, and to do it quick. The other thing I'd say is, it seems like every startup especially does cohort analysis on just like, okay, these are the people we acquired in this week or month, how many continue to stay active over time? And every company that gets further along, is successful enough to get further along in their journey and really understand what's going on with users, okay, that might be one of the metrics that they look at, but then they're like, okay, what are the stages of the customer journey? And what percentage of our customers are we getting to get to this usage of the app and this type of usage, this feature usage of the app, this value proposition in the app? And so you basically map, an ideal customer, they're going to start with this, and then they're going to leverage this feature or this benefit. And then at some point they'll move on to this one. And you're mapping what percentage of our customers are we able to move through that flow. And that's what I think the more sophisticated organizations are able to do, is then drive that kind of not just retention, but adoption of value creating activities within what you're delivering.
Yeah, and I think in B2C is exactly how you described. Well, in B2B, it's for us also a bit kind of a concept of upselling, because we launch additional products. How many of the clients say, okay, I want more of your products, I upsell to the next module or part of the product. So it might be a bit more obvious, but in B2C, I think it's extremely important as well. And you see so many products where people use the one first core feature and then don't even know what is around. And this is exactly what you said, like a good product market fit, or product market fit means also like not just like or let's say like this, you constantly struggle to reach product market fit with every additional product you add to your service. And you always have to again and again prove it. Of course, at some point you have your core service has an initial product market fit and say, okay, there's some people who pay for it, but then it's a constant struggle because you continuously develop further.
But in that sense, I think you could treat especially in consumer products, you could treat each new feature as a product in and of itself in that regard of, are you getting product market fit on that feature that you've just implemented? Because if not, you're actually distracting probably from the overall value proposition.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's often underestimated that you think clearly about how do I measure the success of every feature I launch. So there are very small features, we might not measure it, but if they're bigger features, you say, okay, how do I measure the success of this? And I think many people don't think about this, that is a very important product work, and then measure it. And then that, again, for that feature, you might want to consider quantitative and qualitative input. And I think Miro does a very good job in after using a feature, they asked me, hey, how easy was it for you to do, I don't know, I share your account with, or invite someone to your account. So they ask even in-app specific ratings for specific features I've used and gather feedback, not just like, did I do it or not, but how easy, how much did I like it? I think that's a smart way to also do it for some key interactions.
Cool. Guys, both of you mentioned NPS. I have a question on this, and I like what Jared said. You mentioned it, that it's benchmarkable. It's Marcus, you said it's easy to ask. I think those are the advantages of the methodology. What I saw on the hindsight as well is that, okay, I got a number. What do I do with it? How do you turn? What's your experience in turning an NPS score into action of what I actually do in product? How do I tweak features?
Let me paint two extremes here. One happened today. I'm on the board of a company. Board's been asking the company for quite a while now to start measuring NPS. They finally came to the board meeting with their first NPS score for their B2B product or service, really, and it was 73. 73. That's insanely high. Let's be frank. That's insanely high. That could mean you have 75% promoters, people who rate you, 9 and 10 basically. You could have 25% who are kind of like, oh, I like it quite a bit, but 7, 8, and then 2% who are detractors, and that's how you end up with a 73 score. And we're like, I think it's time to raise prices. And then the CFO goes, you know what? Could we just start by having sales stop discounting? Like that would be a great place to start. Could we just start by like not allowing any more discounting? I'm like, yeah, that's probably a pretty good place to start. So that's one extreme on the high end. And on the low end, look, in a B2B environment, if you're under 20, that's not working. Like fundamentally, that is a recipe for failure. And basically, you should not be continuing to drive effort in sales and marketing to sell more and more of that. You should be putting those resources towards figuring out how to deliver a better value to the client, because otherwise you'll be wasting sales and marketing dollars because you won't get the retention, you won't get the benefits on the other end at the end of the day. So I'd say those are a couple of examples. Certainly B2C is a little bit different, but maybe I'll let Marcus chime in with his experience there.
I agree. There's I think one thing that is important, the NPS or Net Promoter Score is not the silver bullet. You should not blindly rely on it. There's a lot of things. It's an indicator that is a very, as you said, measurable, easy to use indicator. And I think it's important to measure it over time, like once a quarter or so, and see how it changes, because that change could also is an interesting, again, fact. And I think with the question, you combine also always an open question, say, hey, why? Give us some arguments, and learn that qualitative information is also very valuable to read through that and say, okay, what are the reasons why people like it or do not like it, and analyze that deeper. I think this is also something that is helpful in itself. And then I think when you're in B2B, it's also good to take all that feedback and use it both in product and sales, so product to develop further, but know, okay, who are my customers who can maybe upsell to something, or make them a lighthouse customer, make a case study with them because they're so excited about my product. So I think it's important sales information that I would keep in the CRM, customer relationship management software, to also have always an eye on that. And I think when you're in B2B, it's also interesting to measure different users from an organization. We've just did our first NPS survey, and we had in one organization, one person with 10 and one with 7, for example. So that's also interesting information to see how different people experience it in the organization, and map that back to your persona.
Yeah, different roles in a customer organization can evaluate you very differently, and it's really valuable to understand that. The other thing I'd say is segmenting customer types: enterprise versus mid-market versus SMB, one geographic market, one country versus another country, one channel partner versus another channel partner. There's always ways that you can segment this, even if it's just 2 segments. You could end up getting a lot of value by contrasting the score differences. And then to Marcus's point, adding the little qualitative aspect of why did you score this way can be really revealing at times.
Cool, thank you. Let's talk a little bit about churn as well. Like it happens, it's inevitable. In your experience, what are some good proxies? And let's stick to Marcus. I think you mentioned leading indicators in the beginning of the session. What are some like good KPIs and indicators that tell you like, beware, you're having a problem with this customer? This is question number 1. Question: what can you do if you see a customer going down the path of churning, but the customer hasn't churned?
Yeah, that's again a bit of a different thing in B2B and B2C, trying to give examples for both. So first, I think that general retention metrics are a good indicator. If you see people like fall out of certain patterns, or like we talked previously about getting people in better groups of usage, and say, okay, make them regularly active. So if vice versa, if they start dropping out of these groups, it might be whatever seasonal effects or so. There might be effects that impact this. But this is, again, something that is very different from company to company. You need to study this. You need to kind of learn what kind of early indicators do you see. And I think, for example, churn interviews can be helpful to detect certain things. Like once someone churned, interview them, understand. Like it's not easy to get them interviewed. Many people don't want to talk with you anymore once they churn. But it's a kind of invest money into this. Give them €150 Amazon voucher if they talk to you, or even more, to learn, okay, why have they been disappointed? And then say, look at some examples of when did you see kind of a breaking point? What was their experience that maybe triggered that? To learn a little bit about like what are patterns you can look at to identify, to say, churn. And then on the B2B side, I think the bigger difference is how you react on it. Of course, in B2B, you might send your account manager or customer success manager, reach out, have a conversation. Depends, of course, on the revenue side, contract size that you have. For smaller contracts, it might not make sense. But for big contracts, you can like manage that by person. While in B2C, that's harder. Of course, like in N26, we cannot run behind every customer and say, is that, like, can we reactivate them? Of course, you at some point you set up, even we have set up at N26 special email reactivation campaigns to try to bring back users into certain activity groups. But we also understood that there are some user groups, and there we again with the segmenting. Some segments you may want them to even churn because it might be too expensive or hard to keep them. So then you need to admit that mistake of having acquired the wrong user. Don't keep every user for any price. Sure. So right now we have that fact. We have onboarded a couple of what we call C customers for our product, and because they are nice, they were giving us good feedback, but just realized we should not invest too much time and energy in them. It's like we better focus on the A and AAA clients. If they use a product, it's fine, but So again, it's very important to identify this and don't make the mistake on the sales and marketing front.
I would just add a few things I've seen is slower usage. So basically, how many reports a week are they running in your analytics product or platform? How often are they logging in? How many times a day? How many times a week? How long are their usage sessions? Are they sharing, from the application? On the consumer side, Receipt Hog I mentioned earlier of taking pictures of receipts. We were getting averaging 5.5 trips a week. All of a sudden this week there was only 3. Okay, that might be a sign. Okay, they could be traveling, but that could be also that they're just forgetting or not seeing the value as much anymore. And so you might do some alerting, some triggering, some notifications, some other things to make sure they get the value. So I think there's a lot of different ways to potentially understand if a customer is at risk of churning, because you'll just see behavioral differences from one week to the next, from 1 month to the next. And it should be an alert for somebody to do some kind of reach out, whether it's automated or personal.
And I think maybe to summarize here or add a point, in B2B, it might be really individual clients that you look at, while in B2C, it's segments. Say, here is a segment that stopped using this thing in the last month or whatever. And then you need to think, what do I do with the segment? Does it make sense to retarget them, to reach out, to do some actions? So identifying this is important. And then, as I mentioned, it's very important to learn about the churn reasons, because that is the best way to prevent it. It's like learning that it never gets to that point.
I'm really interested in both of you mentioned reactivating, right? Reaching out, doing something. Do you have an anecdote or like a successful story or initiative you had in any of your companies that you could share as like an inspiration of what you do if you notice like there's a customer segment in B2C or there's an important customer in B2B that looks like it's going to churn?
So in Receipt Hog, one example was the most common day for people to upload receipts was Sunday. And so if we saw a user was typically uploading every other day or something like that, but all of a sudden it had been 4 days or more where they hadn't uploaded a receipt, taken a picture of a shopping receipt, then we would trigger a notification on Sunday, because Sunday they were most likely to be downtime. They're basically, they're not running the kids to school, they're not at work, they're in a relaxed state, they're not rushed. We'd trigger a notification, say, hey, don't forget to earn for your receipts. And guess what? People who got notified all of a sudden were like, oh yeah, and they'd go, reach into their purse or into their wallet, and they'd take a bunch of pictures of receipts. And the people who didn't get those notifications didn't. And literally that little trigger made a huge difference, not only in that moment, but in kind of continuously reminding customers the value they get from using your service, and reminding them to do it in a place and time and manner that actually is convenient for them.
I like that story. It's really cool. So let me give you again an example from the N26 time, because it was special in the sense that the base product used to be free, or still the core product is free. So it's not even so easy to say when does a customer actually churn. Of course, like in particular, if they're not really regular active, but use a bank account from time to time as their second or third account. So because they don't really cancel the account if they don't have to pay. So what we always tried is with big, important new products or features we launched, try to kind of make that a reason for them to come back. We've listened, like some said, I signed up and I was a bit disappointed because I don't know, there is no savings feature, or I cannot share my accounts with someone, or you don't do multi transactions, foreign currency transactions or so. So that could even mean running retargeting marketing campaigns on customers that you act on your own audience, because they might not check your emails anymore. So that could be, and I think we have used that in combination with marketing a few times quite successfully in reactivating or bringing user back or activating them at a later point once the product was more mature. And this can be also a type of a good chance that you use new product launches or features to try to show them, hey, the product changed, we listened to you, we're better now, give it a try again.
That works in B2B as well, from my experience. Done a lot of user reactivation and client reactivation based on new features, new capabilities that weren't available previously, and therefore maybe we fell short as a company or as a product in delivering on what that client wanted. But all of a sudden, when we could add this new capability, they were ready to re-engage.
Yeah, and to be honest, we haven't done a great job at N26 in the early days to really tell our audience about our products. We did a release once, and then if you missed that, like by now that changed it. They build a team around this, but I think many companies really underestimate this, of how important it is to sell to your existing audience of how and what you have improved. It's probably equally important to sell to completely new audiences.
We made the same mistake at what's now known as Numerator, which is data and insights on consumer behavior. We do a product announcement when the product would come out, and that might be it. And if somebody missed it, then they just wouldn't know it's there and available. So one of the ways that we solved for that was, as clients were running reports, there's always 5-10 seconds of report runtime, even for the fastest reports in this case. Well, instead of showing something just spiraling, we would pop up. By the way, did you know you can now do X, Y, and Z? Click here to find out more. Click here to give it a try. And that's a way that we continuously made sure that the different ways we could deliver value to that client, or new features that we had released, were actually getting in front of the people who could use them in a moment where they could get value.
Super smart thing to do, and very good example. I have a few questions from the audience, and we have like 7 minutes left, and I want to make sure I'm not the only one asking questions here, but I do give the stage to our active audience members. And the first question is, I'm going to read it out to you. So first of all, great conversation. I'm working at a company that has a mature product, but it does take time to get people to do their first transactions. And what tactics or research would you recommend to understand or encourage people to get over that barrier more quickly?
So I'll jump in. I'd say the first thing is figure out what is absolutely critically necessary for them to do or go through before they can complete that transaction. So in other words, do you really need to ask them all 5 of these information profile questions, or could one do? Do you have to go through a full formal account setup, or could you create a temporary account code behind the scenes to allow this first engagement to go through? Like literally, what is the absolute minimum number of hoops or steps or things that they have to go through in order to achieve that? So that's one. And then 2, if for some reason it has to be longer, of really helping them understand, they're almost there, and here's what they're going to get when they get there. So there's little kind of cookie crumbs along the way that are leading them to this exciting, I see another crumb, and I see another crumb. There's got to be a cookie coming. There's got to be something good coming here if I reach down and pick this up and do this little work that they're asking me to do to get to this point of my first transaction in the case of the person who wrote in. So I think you have to make it feel to the customer like they're almost there and they're about to get some kind of real reward if they keep with it.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think it's really analyzing A, what's absolutely necessary, and B, what are possible misunderstandings in this journey to that point. So talk to users who went through that journey, and ask them for every single step, what did you feel at this stage? What were you scared about? What were unsure about? Talk to someone who recently went through that, and oftentimes changing a bit of the wording or the copy and saying, okay, make it more clear for them. So that is one way to make basically an interview with users who just recently went through and understand each step. What did you feel? What was unclear? And vice versa, talk to you, observe users who currently go through that journey, observe them, what they do, and then interview them afterwards. It's a bit harder to get that set up, but I think can be very rewarding. And it can also be a demo setting when you invite someone, say, hey, click it through, look what they do, ask them at every step, what would you expect to happen next? So I think really optimizing this journey is very important.
Cool. I have a question. We talked a lot about NPS. Oops, we lost Jared. I hope we can make it. Oh, it's back. Good. Okay, all right. So the question is about NPS, that there have been like many UX research subject matter experts that have been speaking very passionately on the disadvantages of NPS. So Jared, we're talking about like the disadvantages of NPS. There's a lot of discussion around that it's not really a good indicator of customer loyalty. What are your thoughts around that? Critiques NPS not being a good predictor of loyalty.
Well, what are we trying to predict really with it? So fundamentally, it's a question of how likely are you to recommend, and so that should correlate with loyalty, but that's not actually what it's measuring, right? It's measuring whether or not you see value in the service that someone else you think is in the same shoes could get value from. And so I think that's one. Two, if UX research is finding that, I don't think NPS is a great measure for user experience research. I think it's fundamentally about the core value proposition of the service being delivered, which is factoring in price and level of effort and competing alternatives, other things. It's much broader than UX. And so, I think it's also not measuring necessarily how strong the UX side of things is. So understand what it's measuring, but I think there's a lot of evidence out there, including some recent ones. There was a recent interview from a well-regarded head of product at a large company on Lenny's podcast, for example, where he was talking about their findings with NPS and how they could tie it back to very specific ongoing behaviors and word of mouth and driving word of mouth for their platform, which was key to their growth. And so I just think there's too many examples where it's demonstrated that it actually works well. I studied 25,000 consumer goods brands over 5 years, tracked NPSs relative to repeat purchase behaviors and brand growth over time and retention. And I can tell you there's something there.
I can only re-emphasize the point of don't trust only the NPS. It's one metric. And as Jared said, it measures a specific thing. So it's a combination of things you need. And there's not the one metric that predicts everything. I think the Ellis score, Jean Ellis score, is an even better one, in my opinion, in overall user loyalty and how much someone loves the product. More really product specific. But the truth is, look at hard data, retention, and so on. So don't expect too much from the NPS score. But it's still it's a meaningful KPI in a mix of other KPIs.
Okay, I have we're out of time. I have a last question, and I'd like to throw it 30 seconds. Okay, just whatever comes to your mind, throw it out there. And the question is, there are people who never really adopt the product, right? They sign up, but then they immediately churn, so to say. And then the question is, what do you do with these kind of customers? And Maria is writing that currently she sees companies only sending out emails and trying to turn these customers into active customers. So very quick, rapid round. What do you do with these customers? They signed up, but they're not adopting.
Study their channel. Where are they coming from? Try very hard to talk to some of them, understand why. I think that's essential.
Yep, I agree. I think there's a difference between marketing-based reactivation, which is what this person, Maria, writing in, is seeing and experiencing, versus pick a handful, interview and understand what's going on, and use that to drive changes to your actual product experience. That's where you're going to make the difference on the thousands of people who are going to have that potential to churn in the future.
Yeah, and understand, are they coming organically, or is this a shitty campaign that ran, that marketing ran?
Guys, thanks so much. We could continue this discussion eternally. It's getting late for both of you. I really appreciate that you joined me. Awesome stories. I'm eternally grateful, and I hope to see you around.
Sounds good. Thanks so
Exactly.
much. Appreciate it. Cheers all.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Bye.
Enjoy.